Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Babies. Kids. The thing that you once were and the thing that you think, well, maybe someday, or no, not at all, or yeah, I'm pregnant. Either way, unless it's completely unexpected, there's a lot of thinking that goes into the decision of whether or not to have kids. The issue of your career, your economic stability, what are schools like in your area, do you want to stay in that area, do you really like the person that you're with, do you want to have kids on your own, etc., etc., etc. But something that we don't often hear about in the debate on parenthood is the question of climate change. We, as a species, are facing cataclysmic, catastrophic, and at this point largely inevitable shifts in climate due to our own stupidity and arrogance. And many women, and men, grapple with this question. How the fuck can I bring a kid into this world knowing that he or she might face famine, extreme flooding, extreme drought, lack of fresh water, fresh air, fresh food? Josephine Ferorelli and Meghan Kallman thought about this a lot, and through their mutual musings, they founded Conceivable Future. Conceivable Future is an organization that declares the climate crisis a reproductive crisis, not only from the perspective of environmental activists, but from the perspective of women. Women who find it more and more difficult to make up our own minds about our own bodies in a system that continues to devalue both. So last week I sat down with founders Meghan and Josephine to talk about Conceivable Future. Take a look.
We connected over this question of how do we think about even the possibility of having children given the way that climate change is reshaping our reality and given the effects that it's going to have on the lives that we've imagined for ourselves. And I remember a tremendous feeling of relief during that first conversation because I was like, oh, I'm not the only person grappling with this.
I think the other part of it, too, was that we'd both been doing climate work for quite a while. I'd been working on coal export facilities on the West Coast and doing some reporting and climate coverage. And Meghan had been working in divestment and a variety of other issues. But the heart of the matter for us was really just how it was foreclosing our vision of our own future, the future of our families and our friends, and just people of our generation. And so to be able to draw a straight line between the motivator to do this work and the actions that we could do, the conversations that we could have if we faced it head on, it was a really inspiring connection, a really inspiring moment.
Yeah, and we bonded as well over this sense that the climate movement has historically lacked some of the heart, the soul, right? That has made past social movements successful because we talk about parts per million and we talk about emissions and blah, blah, blah. And those are things that are really, really hard to connect to our own lives and our own feelings and our own sort of images of what our lives could be like. But this question, on the other hand, is extremely personal. In fact, it's so personal that it's sort of an explosive thing to talk about in public. But it does very clearly make this connection between what climate change is and how we react to it and what it means for our lives.
And in that, because you make a tie between the battle being waged on women's reproductive rights and climate change, talk a little bit about how those two tie together.
Well, we in our mission statement, we say that we demand the right to make reproductive choices free from massive avoidable government-sponsored harm, which basically means that we claim the right to self-determination, which also, sort of necessarily includes the legal and protected right to make whatever reproductive decisions are right for us. Those are being encroached upon in so many ways right now, right? So through the contaminants, through the climate change, through through all of this external environmental stuff, and then also internally through the way that our political system is dialoguing or not about reproductive choice at the moment.
We also find that in the kind of mainstream environmental movement, when we bring up this topic, a kind of classic white middle class instinct is, oh, overpopulation, we're talking about population, we're talking about having fewer children, obviously. But that really doesn't take into account the long legacy in this country and in others of restricting access to reproductive health services of all kinds, and in fact, in some cases, sterilization of poor women, women of color, Indigenous women. it's a much more complex issue if you look at it intersectionally, and that's one thing that has been omitted from the conversation of climate and reproduction up until this point.
Going back to what Josephine had mentioned about this idea of population control, something that you also hear is, oh, you should adopt, because that there are so many kids that don't have loving families, particularly in third world countries. So instead of adding to the population with your own genes, why don't you just adopt? Can you talk a little bit about this, this like popular sort of activist suggestion?
Well, so I want to just start by saying that that's a hugely important piece of the population puzzle and of the future of the human prospect, really. When we say that everyone should just adopt, right, there's a lot of privilege kind of loaded into that statement, because if everyone just adopts, who are we adopting?
You know, developing countries, so-called developing countries, right, have contributed not very much to the climate change configuration, and yet they are, as Josephine mentioned, bearing the brunt of it, right? And so the question isn't, who's going to raise these kids, but like, how do we create a world that's more just, in which anyone who wants to can raise kids, and people who don't want to have that choice as well?
I wanted to go back to what you'd mentioned before, that you'll hear that, oh, it's your job to have kids because you're intelligent, and because you care, and you'll raise intelligent, awesome kids that will carry on this fight. Speak a little bit about that phrase.
The point is to make the world safe so that women and men can pursue whatever reproductive decisions they want, not for us to say, like, you have a master's degree, so therefore, you are smart and thoughtful enough, we can now entrust. That's not how self-determination works. It's not how justice works.
It's very gendered, because it's saying that you, smart woman that you are, the biggest contribution that you're likely to make in this lifetime is through reproduction. But the sort of corollary to that statement, which also sort of drives me nuts, we see a lot of this in like Facebook comment sections and things like that when we make posts, is but maybe your kid is going to be the one that fixes this whole problem, right? Maybe your kid's going to be the Einstein who's so-and-so, which is, we tell ourselves a lot of stories. We need a fair number of fantasies to live in the age of climate consequences. It's not an easy time to get out of bed in the morning and do the hard work. But that's a fantasy that I can't really abide by. We have no idea, having a kid is not an investment in like the future of the climate movement, right? It's a personal choice, and it's a personal choice everyone should get to make. But that argument alone is like a little bit facetious and a little bit ridiculous.
Because of course, then you're also deciding your child's future. Like if the child wants to be a cellist or something, you're saying, no, you can't do that. I've already decided that you're going to be a climate warrior. So in talking about this, I don't decide for my children, and if I were to have a kid, it's my job is to be a parent. Something that you hear from, or that I hear from my parents, when I've had this debate, I've had this debate with my mom a few times, and she said, well, I thought it was, I debated this with myself, like, there was the nuclear scare, and your father was born around World War II. It's always been like the best of days, the worst of days. How do you feel that right now is different compared to those battles that mothers or parents were worried about before?
The fact that humans have lived under crisis forever doesn't make that any less painful. And I frequently find myself wondering, right, like if I had been born enslaved, or if I had been born during an extremely oppressive period of history where, I was living in a concentration camp and I had the choice to choose to have or not have a kid, I'm guessing there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of women who would have made a really different choice. Toni Morrison wrote a very powerful book about that. Nobody ever has had as much control over our fertility as this generation in this country has, ever. And that's a tremendous, it's a tremendous privilege. It's a tremendous, as I said, historical anomaly. I also, I think we are well within our rights to live into the potential of that, right? To use it if we want.
Finally, I want to talk a little bit about this platform that you've created, because it's not just an organization where people go and you look at testimonials and read some of your talking points. You actually you actually are asking people to act in their own communities by having these house parties and these discussions. Talk a little bit about these conversations that you ask people to host in their own local communities.
I would say that over the course of the past year, there's been two major categories that the house parties have fallen into, and one is for longtime climate activists. We tend to have either like very activist or very first-time activist participation. And for people who've been in the movement for a long time, we often hear that it's just such a relief to get to come together and get to say this stuff out loud. That as long as you've been doing policy work or you've been doing organizing, like it's been hard to say this stuff. It's been hard to actually stake the emotional claims as well as the real world claims. But then there's also people who really have felt closed out of climate action. So there's people who are paralyzed, who are like, I see it, I understand it, I feel it, but what can I do? So sometimes those are my favorites, the house parties where people really haven't come to a climate event before, or maybe people haven't marched before and they don't know what they can do yet, but getting into a group, not meeting new people, meeting friends of theirs that they've never had this conversation with. That can be so powerful.
And I guess I have one thing else to contribute, and it's neither here nor there in the conversation, so you can put it where you please or cut it out entirely. It's been instructive for me as the project has started to get more press. Every time some big press article comes out, we get this weird backlash of, frankly, mostly men, getting really angry at the project and calling people stupid and self-centered. But I have been extremely surprised and frankly disappointed by some of the vitriol that has come our way, sort of the gendered vitriol, around this question of women asking themselves if having a child is something they want, can morally do, etc. Is it ethical for me in my life? The fact of asking that question seems to transgress some sort of very ingrained set of expectations about how women reproduce, frankly. It should also be mentioned that we have actually pretty even distribution of men and women, or men identifying and women identifying folks in most of our parties. Rarely has it been extremely lopsided. So these are non-gender specific parties and non-gender specific experiences, but the reactivity seems to be directed primarily at women, again, which probably shouldn't surprise me, but which has come to pass.
To learn more about Conceivable Future and to host your own house party, check out conceivablefuture.org.